Good afternoon, and welcome to today's BATIC Institute webinar discussing advanced construction trends and practices. My name is Susan Howard, and I'm the director of the BATIC Institute at AASHTO. Today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour in length and includes 3 speakers followed by a Q&A session. Before getting started, I just want to review a few logistics. You should have received an email with a link to the PowerPoint presentation. If you did not receive this email, please visit the BATIC Institute website at financingtransportation.org, where you'll find a copy of the PowerPoint available for download. Everyone will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. At any time, you may submit questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the GoToWebinar control panel for the live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website by the end of the day tomorrow. So just to tell a little bit about the BATIC Institute, we are a part of AASHTO that provides capacity building support to state DOTs and their partners around project finance and transportation. We provide in-person services such as events and trainings, as well as information through our website, such as this webinar. The Institute also works on research projects and strives to foster dialogue around transportation finance techniques. If you would like more information on the BATIC Institute and how we may assist you and your organization, you can contact me anytime at showard@ashto.org. Thanks again for attending today's webinar, and a big thank you to our panelists for participating. As I said, the slides and video, the slides and recording of this webinar will be available on the BATIC website, and we'll also post all the responses to today's questions that we get on the website within the next few days. So a little bit of our overview for this webinar. We're first going to hear an introduction to advanced construction from Max Inman from Mercator Advisors, who Mercator recently completed a research project for the BATIC Institute on advanced construction. And then we're going to hear from 3 states that have different stories to tell about how they have used advanced construction to accelerate projects in their states. We'll hear from Virginia, North Carolina, and Delaware. And then we'll move on to the live Q&A session. So be thinking about those questions and type them in at any time in the box. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Max. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Susan. My name is Max Inman. I'm a senior advisor with Mercator Advisors and one of the team members for the BATIC Institute. Advanced construction is authorized in Section 115 of Title 23 United States Code. Advanced Construction Authority is an exception to the general provision of federal appropriation law requiring federal funds to be obligated at the time a project or activity is approved by a federal official. The Advanced Construction Authority allows FHWA to approve a project without the obligation of federal funds. FHWA's approval means the project meets federal requirements, but does not commit funding for the project at the time of approval or in the future. Advanced construction has been a part of highway law since the 1950s, but a number of changes have occurred to the provision. In the 1970s and 80s, Advanced Construction Authority was limited to certain programs, was only available when the state lacked sufficient funds or obligation authority to advance the project, required a future year authorization to be in effect for the program, and required the project to be converted, meaning the federal share had to be within 30 days after funds were apportioned in the subsequent fiscal year. The purpose of advanced construction during the early years was to simply allow states to move projects forward at the end of a fiscal year. Radical changes to the program occurred in the late 1990s, primarily in response to FHWA's Innovative Finance Research Program. Advanced Construction Authority was expanded to all Title 23 projects. There were no restrictions on when the projects could be AC'd, and partial conversion was authorized. Partial conversion allows states to obligate the federal share in increments. Partial conversion authority is particularly important for states issuing Garvey bonds by allowing funds to be obligated in the year debt service payments are due. AASHTO's Center for Excellence in Project Finance published a study on the use of advanced construction in 2011. This study showed a total advanced construction balance nationwide of $10 billion in 1997. This balance grew steadily through 2007 to a total of $46 billion, but declined in 2008, 2009, and 2010, the last year of the study, to a balance of $38 billion. The reason for the decline is uncertain, but states were focused on advancing projects with funds authorized by the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in response to the recession. The BATIC Institute commissioned a follow-up to the 2011 study to look at current trends and uses of advanced construction. The 2019 research brief showed national advanced construction balances increasing in 2011 and continuing to rise through 2018, the last year of the study, to a total of $61 billion. This is a 61% increase since 2010. Almost all state DOTs have used advanced construction to assist them in advancing their programs or specific projects. However, the level of use and the reasons for using AC varies among the states. Conducting the updated research brief, we looked at the AC balances in dollar amounts, as well as controlling for the size of each state's program by comparing the balances as a percentage of the state's federal obligation limitation, sometimes referred to as obligation authority. Federal obligation authority is the amount a state can obligate during the fiscal year for most federal aid highway programs and is a good reflection of a state's relative size of the federal aid program. Analysis of trends revealed three groups of states of particular interest. First, states with an increased balance of advanced construction since 2010. Second, states with a decreased balance. And third, states maintaining a relatively large balance of advanced construction during the period 2010 to 2018. This was defined as a balance exceeding 200% of the state's federal obligation authority. You will be hearing from three states representing each of these scenarios. In 2010, Virginia was one of the top 10 active users of advanced construction with an outstanding balance of $1.7 billion, or 200% of their federal obligation authority. Since 2010, Virginia's use of advanced construction has increased substantially. In 2018, their outstanding balance was $9.3 billion, nearly 1,000% of their obligation authority. This is the largest increase of any state, both in terms of actual dollars and percentage of obligation authority. Wendy Thomas from Virginia DOT is here today to discuss Virginia's AC usage in more detail. North Carolina has been an exceptionally active user of AC with an outstanding balance between 200 and 400% of their federal obligation authority between 2010 and 2018. Van Augebright of North Carolina DOT is joining us to share his insights into North Carolina's use of AC. And finally, Delaware was also an active AC user in 2010. Their $343 million balance represented 243% of their federal obligation authority. That balance has fluctuated over time, but recently trended downward. The state went from having the seventh largest balance as a percentage of federal obligation authority to 27th. Lainey Thornton is joining us from Delaware DOT to discuss their AC practices. As part of the study, some states were invited to respond to a survey. The survey results found that states use AC to manage their federal obligation authority, including August redistribution, to manage cash flow, to better deal with Federal Authorization Act extensions and continuing resolutions, and to carry out Garvey bond projects or programs. Some states also see advanced construction as a useful tool in preparing for the federal rescission scheduled for July 2020 and the expiration of the FAST Act in September 2020. And now we'll hear from Wendy Thomas from the Virginia DOT.
Thank you. I'm Wendy Thomas, Federal Programs Management Division Administrator with the Virginia Department of Transportation. My division is responsible for strategic oversight and direction of VDOT's $1 billion plus annually in federal funds, as well as STIP management and oversight. We appreciate the opportunity to share today about our advanced construction program approach here in Virginia. I'll talk a little bit about a background on how we think about AC here in Virginia, our AC balance and primary drivers of increases in our balance since 2010, our approach to AC on locally funded and locally administered projects, as well as recent changes to our AC practice that have helped to minimize inactive projects. VDOT uses AC to the extent allowed under federal regulations. Our approach allows for maximum flexibility in the use of federal funds in meeting our annual obligation authority. In essence, we federalize all projects that are eligible for federal reimbursement. We do grant exemptions to federal projects programmatically or individually, but exemptions are not the norm. At the time of project authorization, our practice is to obligate any programmed federal funds in the budget year. And then we use AC to reflect any planned future federal funds provided to the project, as well as all non-federal funds, including local, private, and other funds that are not needed to fulfill matching requirements or cover no non-participating costs. We then use AC conversion on the basis of federal funds program in each budget year thereafter. From 2010 to 2018, our AC balance has increased from about $1.7 billion to $9.3 billion. Obviously, that's a significant increase, but that balance is reflective of both our approach to seeking federal authorization for all project phases eligible for participation, but is also the fluid nature of our funding and our capital program, the 6-year improvement program, and of course, our desire to maintain flexibility in our use of federal funds. The primary drivers of the increase from 2010 include just general increases in the size of our federal program over the period. We have an extensive GARVI bond program in which debt service is AC'd. We also extensively use public-private partnerships in the delivery of our program, and Virginia's approach has been to AC the private contribution on those projects. Finally, a large driver is the federalization of our large preventative maintenance and operations programs, which are currently about $1.7 billion annually. Within those programs, we have several very large multi-year federal agreements related to Safety Service Patrol and Transportation Operations Center contracts, as well as implementation of multi-year programmatic federal authorizations for pavement construction and bridge PE preventative maintenance activities beginning in 2017. Collectively, these agreements together can have AC totaling more than $1.5 to $2 billion at any given time. Next, I'd like to share how we handle locally funded and locally administered projects in the context of AC. It's important to highlight that Virginia's transportation funding approach is centralized at the state level, although there's obviously significant collaboration with our local partners. Co-funding and multi-funding of projects in Virginia is common, particularly now with our prioritization processes, one of which is SmartScale that many of you probably heard of, as well as our other application-based programs that reward leveraging of funding from sources other than those provided through the state or the federal government. And as mentioned before, our approach is to federalize all projects eligible for federal reimbursement to allow for maximum flexibility. On local projects, that means that we generally use the AC provision to reflect the amount of non-federal funds from any source other than federal funds. This means that all locally funded projects generally have some level of AC at the time of authorization. Finally, a little bit about our use of AC to minimize inactive projects. First, although not directly related to AC, it's important to note that we follow the Ready to Proceed concept and FHWA's funds management guidance very closely. We work to authorize projects as close to when work will actually begin as possible and use our project scheduling system rather than ad hoc requests to plan for when projects need to be authorized. Our dashboard metrics, which drill down to the milestone level on projects, helps ensure that projects get going and spend when they're scheduled. This helps somewhat with authorizing or obligating too soon and therefore projects going inactive. Back to AC. We employ 2 key approaches to AC that have helped with inactivity. One, for construction advertisements, in the past, we obligated any available or budget year funds at advertisement, but found that delays in award were a significant factor on local projects in particular in our inactive list each quarter. In 2016, we changed course and began using AC provision at construction advertisement with conversion of any available funds at award modification, which is closer to when we'd expect the project to begin spending soon. A second tool is that within our preventative maintenance and operations program, We do not obligate funds until project completion when all expenditures are posted and reconciled, and instead use the AC provision at authorization. This has the added benefit of allowing us to final voucher these projects immediately upon conversion. As a result of both of these two approaches, we've had a significant reduction in the number of projects reaching inactive status since 2014. Our inactive list each quarter now is regularly less than 10 projects, and our final inactive balance each quarter is generally well below 1%. Now you'll hear from Van Argebright from North Carolina Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Wendy. My name is Van Argebright. I am the Director of Planning and Programming at NCDOT. And first I'm going to discuss how maintaining a relatively high balance of AC has helped NCDOT manage its program. The use of advanced construction has two advantages that makes it desirable for NCDOT to heavily utilize it. The first is the same reason that any state has for using AC. It allows us to accelerate projects. The second and maybe more unique reason is that it has allowed us to better manage our federal program. The slide you see discusses our current AC balance in comparison to our annual apportionments. As you can see, our FY19 apportionment is approximately $1.1 billion, and we have about $4.1 billion in advanced construction, so about 4 years worth of federal funding. The last bullet shows that the vast majority of this AC is in the NHPP category. So how did we get to where we are in regards to AC? There was a strong growth in state funding sources in the 1990s, which created large cash balances at the turn of the century. What was happening was the budget authority available to let our projects capped our construction program, while the actual cash needed to pay for these projects took many years to pay out. In 2001, in light of our large cash balances, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a bill that required that we have a cash management plan and develop tools to better manage cash. That law, in combination with the relatively new Federal Advanced Construction Partial Conversion Rule, led the NCDOT to adopt an essentially AC all federal aid projects policy. Over the years, we have grown more comfortable with AC, and currently we initially use 100% AC on the vast majority of our projects, while using our obligation authority to convert AC projects that already have billings on them, and they were AC'd years before. This practice means that very little of our obligation authority is used on projects that do not have billing. This practice has accelerated our federal reimbursements and also allowed our financial office to set a $20 million per week billing goal, which helps in providing predictable cash flows. Since North Carolina has a policy of using AC as much as possible, we state fund most PE work and most other small projects to help mitigate the additional administrative work associated with using AC and partial conversion on projects. The large AC balances have also helped during August redistribution, as we have projects already underway to request additional obligation authority for, and we can rapidly utilize the additional obligation authority when it becomes available and have immediate billings. The department has no official policies on the amount of AC to use. There's a financial management group within the department that meets regularly and reviews the amount of AC being used at any given time. This group attempts to balance the cash needs of the department with the risk inherent with the use of AC. The slide on your screen now shows our use of AC over the past 10 years, and as you will see, we are increasing our use of AC. The downside to our approach of using virtually all budget and obligation authority for immediate reimbursement is exposed when you're operating under continuing resolutions, especially short-term ones. This approach can create almost immediate cash flow issues if there is a disruption in the flow of federal reimbursements, such as congressional budget impasses. North Carolina is able to manage this issue because it has such a strong state revenue stream. Only 25% of our revenue is federal. We also use a Garvey bond program to assist us in project delivery and cash management. From a federal cash management perspective, a project let with Garvey bond revenue is essentially an advanced construction project with a long and established conversion period. North Carolina has an evergreen bonding capacity with a ceiling. As the indebtedness gets paid down, capacity is created to issue additional bonds. This recycling of debt also allows us to advance projects utilizing additional budget authority and replenish the cash as needed by selling bonds. Roughly 30% of our current AC balance is associated with Garvey bond payments. One additional benefit of the use of Garvey bonds is that due to consistently low bond interest rates, it has let us beat construction inflation. Projects built using Garvey bonds have not only provided transportation benefits to the public faster, but they have cost less than building the same project at a later date. The slide you see on your screen shows our Garvey bond activity and the effective interest rates associated with each sale. Over the past 10 years, our construction cost index has risen by an average of 5% annually, which is far above the interest rates that we have gotten, which range from 1.3% to 3.9%. This slide shows a breakout between the Garvey and regular AC. The Garvey's long-term debt, and it is in the orange, and our regular AC is in the blue. Next, I'm going to discuss how would the upcoming reauthorization impact our operations and how it will affect our AC approach. Because we have strong state revenues, we are less dependent on federal funds in many states. Federal revenue only accounts for 25% of our annual income. We tend to generally assume that the federal program will remain constant or grow slightly over time. While that might appear optimistic, we feel history supports that view. We have a cash forecasting model that enables us to predict cash balances in the future based on differing assumptions. We must be able to maintain adequate cash balances even without federal reimbursements for short periods of time. North Carolina has a legislatively mandated cash floor that stops us from awarding additional contracts if the cash on hand falls below a certain threshold. If the federal program reimbursements were to stop long enough for the cash on hand to fall below the legislative threshold, the department must stop awarding new contracts of all types until the cash balance exceeds the threshold again. This would be a very draconian outcome for the department and the entire transportation industry in North Carolina. This slide is a screenshot of the output of our cash model. It shows our anticipated revenues and expenditures over a 5-year period. The black line, the heavy black line, shows the projected end-of-month cash balance. The green line is our internal cash target, and the red line is the legislative cash floor. And the legislative cash floor is currently about $280 million. We are pleased to see a Senate bill that would largely continue the existing federal aid program. As long as it appears that the federal aid program will continue to exist in its present form, we do not plan to adjust our AC procedures. However, we do have a current cash shortfall that is causing a slowdown in some parts of our program. Concern over the future availability of federal reimbursements would exacerbate the anticipated length of this shortfall. We will be watching events in Washington closely to determine if we need to adjust our approach. So next, I want to discuss how NCDOT is planning for the rescission and how that might affect the AC projects. In anticipation of the FY20 rescission, we're making a conscious effort to use our obligation authority in those budget areas subject to rescission. We're doing that by accelerating conversion of project billings in budget areas subject to rescission, which is primarily NHPP and non-population designated STP fund categories. This will lower our unexpended appropriation budget balances in those areas while increasing the balances in budgetary areas that are not subject to rescission. This is another area where having a high AC balances has helped us managing our exposure to the rescission. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Lainey.
Thank you, Van. My name is Lainey Thornton, and I am the Finance Director for the Delaware Department of Transportation. And I'll be spending time today to speak about our experiences with advanced construction funding. Going back to 2010, our advanced construction balance was greater than 2 times our annual apportionment. In fiscal year 2010, we closed with over $343 million in advanced construction funding, which is significant for a smaller state like Delaware. This high balance of advanced construction funding was large in part due to a Garvey bond issuance earlier in that year, which increased our overall balance by $125 million. Since 2010, Delaware has lowered our overall advanced construction balance by over $180 million, as demonstrated on the chart provided. So what led Delaware to make the decision to lower our advanced construction balances? In fiscal year 2010, Delaware DOT made the concerted effort to lower all forms of debt for the department. The overall debt burden of the department was increasing year over year and was not sustainable. Our annual debt service costs were increasing our operating budget each year, and that was taking away from our capital program investments. We began to embrace the motto that every dollar saved in operating costs is a dollar that can be invested into our capital program. As a department, we determined that our advanced construction balance was also a debt risk when the overall review of our debt was conducted. Our team agreed that an advanced construction balance of 2 times our annual apportionment was greater than we were comfortable with when taking into consideration the Treasury policy within our state. A new agency policy was created and implemented for advanced construction funding. This new policy established a threshold for the department, which was keeping the advanced construction fund balances no greater than 1.5% of our annual obligation limitation. Another factor in opting to lower our advanced construction funding was a strategic review of our capital program needs 6 to 10 years out to determine what significant projects needed to be funded. In our case, we have been preparing for a large bridge and pavement rehabilitation project on I-95 set to begin in 2021 that is estimated to have a cost of over $200 million. For Delaware, this is a large hit to our overall capital program in a short 2-year duration. On this next slide, I'll go over the steps that Delaware took to lower our advanced construction balances. In fiscal year 2010, the department was able to successfully get a new revenue package passed that brought in an additional $25 million of revenues annually to our capital program. We took advantage of bond refinancing, and we were able to restructure our outstanding debt and reduce our debt service costs. That lowered our annual operating costs considerably, allowing those dollars to be invested in our capital program. Delaware also took advantage of the TIFIA loan program for our US 301 mainline project that was just completed in January. This single project alone was more than our total annual capital program. We implemented strong budget controls for our operating program in order to limit growth. We ended up with cost savings each year, which was reinvested into our capital program. We have adjusted advanced construction projects and the timing of the projects in the department's 6-year program. As a result of these efforts and a strong fiscal management, we recently received a rating upgrade for the department, which lowered debt costs for newly incurred debt. Overall, we reduced operating costs for debt service by $32 million and reduced our outstanding debt by over $400 million. Now we will look at advanced construction funds and our STIP. In Delaware, we refer to our STIP as the Capital Transportation Program, or CTP, which up to this year was published annually. Within the last year, we worked with legislature to have this process change to biannually due to the amount of efforts and increased size of our program. The CTP meets both the federal requirements for a statewide transportation improvement program, as well as our state requirements for an annual capital program. In our CTP, Delaware plans for all advanced construction conversions and demonstrates fiscal constraint, taking into consideration planned conversions and AC deferrals. Delaware has an MOU between DelDOT, our MPO partners, and both Federal Highway and Federal Transit that allows for modifications and amendments to our STIP. In our experience, the number of STIP modifications or amendments that are done due to advanced construction conversions are limited as they are programmed into the STIP on an annual basis. However, we do anticipate that this number may increase now that we are moving to a biannual basis for our STIP. Overall, Delaware has minimal issues with including or modifying advanced construction projects in our STIP. My last slide is to review policies for our state as it relates to advanced construction funding. Annually, the budget for our capital program is approved through the Bond and Capital Improvement Act. This approval process is both for state and federal authorizations. Advanced construction conversion obligations are included in the federal authorization category. At a state level, there is currently not a policy that limits or restricts the use or level of advanced construction funding balance in Delaware. As indicated on my previous slide, the policy on advanced construction fund balance has been implemented by our agency. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm now turning it back over to Susan.
Thank you, Wendy, Van, and Lainey, for your presentations and for the great information that you shared. We're going to open it up now to questions. Again, if folks do have questions in the audience, feel free to type them into the question box and we'll get to them. The first question I wanted to ask is sort of for everyone, but it touches upon an issue I think that was most directly brought up by Van in regards to the large cash balance that North Carolina carries around, and also the issue touched on by Lainey about debt risk. And so it strikes me that AC is really an issue of cash management and risk tolerance, and so every state's approach to it is going to be different. So I'd like to ask a little bit about that. What do is cash flow management really the biggest risk that folks face when looking at an AC strategy, and how does that the potential disruption in federal reimbursements that Van mentioned being concerned about, how does that affect your strategy?
Do you want me to begin?
Yeah, why don't you start off? Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, this is Van. Yes, I agree that decisions about AC is largely a risk tolerance issue. We have traditionally carried a pretty large balance of funds. The legislature has recently, I hate to say pressured, but encouraged us to lower our cash balances, which of course increases our exposure. So if you have, we bill about $20 million a week to FHWA. So that's our income stream we're counting on from FHWA. So of course, if you have a $500 million balance, $20 million per week that you can't receive because there's some sort of shutdown in Washington, it's going to take several weeks for us to feel that, and I've been doing this 20 plus years, and I don't remember any shutdowns that lasted for a really long protracted time. So we feel pretty comfortable that that there's not going to be long shutdowns, but it is certainly something that you have to consider.
Thanks, Van. Wendy or Lainey, do you want to address that topic of risk and cash management?
This is Wendy. I'm probably not the best equipped to talk about cash flow or cash management. What I would say is that we are fiscally constrained in our state 6-year improvement program, and we enjoy, like some of the other states here today, quite a large state funding mechanism here. So, I think for the most part for us, like right now, we're flush with cash on the state side, which is, I think, a unique position to be in. But clearly, we've just recently started taking a look at our AC practice, but it hasn't really played into any discussions for us on risk because, as I said, we have such a large state funding mechanism and we must remain fiscally constrained at the state law level. It hasn't really played into our thought process yet.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll move on to another question, particularly maybe one for Lainey. Have there been challenges for you all in adhering to the annual obligation limitation policy, and how do you ensure that your department follows that policy?
We have not had issues with adhering to the annual obligation limitation. We've been able to meet the objectives each year. We're getting to a point where we feel that we've lowered our AC balances enough, and we know that we have larger projects coming up that will increase the AC balances and help us with meeting those goals in the future.
Great, thank you. We've had one other question come in that's related to risk, but a bit of a different take than the last question that I asked. But can you discuss some of the key risks associated with AC? Is it more on procurement practices and documentation, or other things? So could you talk a little bit about some of the unique challenges that AC might lend itself to regarding things like procurement and documentation?
So this is Van. I mean, to my knowledge, you know, what we're doing is we're going to FHWA and requesting authorization to proceed with a project, whether it be PE, right-of-way, or construction. And so all the procedures and the procurement procedures, the billing procedures are identical. It's just we are not obligating the funds at that time. We're AC, and then of course, and saying at a future date when we have both the budget authority and the obligation authority, we're going to come back and ask you to obligate the funds. So to my knowledge, from a procurement standpoint, you handle the project the same. So I don't perceive any additional risk with AC in a project. The risk when you AC a project is that you've signed a contract with someone, you have bills to pay, and so if you don't have an adequate stream of state revenue to pay those bills, so you don't have a federal revenue to pay those bills, so you're counting on state revenues, and if there is a disruption, they don't. There was, I think, the last one of the continuing resolutions. It took about 3 weeks to get the funds into FMIS so that we could start billing again. So there was, even though the continuing resolution passed, there was some time that went by. So I view it more as a financial risk.
Right.
Hi, this is Wendy. I'd echo what Van said on the procurement side. If you're getting an authorization and you're obligating funds, you're in essence certifying that you've met all of the procurement requirements, for example, with a construction advertisement. One of the things that we have talked about with the Virginia division with regard to documentation, though, is on the closeout side and sort of risks of not fully converting any AC balances on a project timely, whatever that means, at the end of the project, and running the risk that project records could get destroyed if you maintain that AC for too long, and then attempt to convert it to, say, close out the project. If for some reason the financial records or other records of the project have been destroyed and the project is pulled for, say, an improper payments review, then you're necessarily an improper payment because you no longer have the records to support the billing to FHWA. So that's something we've talked about. We haven't really run into it, but it certainly was identified as a risk area between my office and our division office.
And this is Lainey from Delaware. I would mirror Van's statement in terms of procurement. We process the AC deferral the same way as we would a typical obligation, just in the FEMA system it's done a bit differently. However, one of the challenges on our end is the conversion process. So it's quite a cumbersome, lengthy process in our accounting system to perform the conversion transaction. So that's something that we've been looking at as a team to see how we can kind of enhance and streamline that process.
Very good. Very good points. Wendy, can I ask a little bit about your comments related to federalizing local projects and using AC on those projects? I think that's something that we've heard. I think that's something that could potentially be interesting and appealing to states across the country that maybe aren't currently doing that. But can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges and benefits to taking that approach with federalizing local projects using AC?
Sure. So, as I mentioned in the presentation, I think, one of the things that's important to note about the way Virginia does funding is that we really are heavily centralized at the state level. We have an overarching policy board by statute that approves our 6-year improvement program. And so what that means is that in Virginia, even local funding, first off, if it's locally generated, has to be approved by the General Assembly in order to generate that revenue. But in most cases, our funding programs are set up to reward leveraging of funds that aren't provided through state revenue streams. So for those of you who are familiar with, for example, our smart scale prioritization process now, we're looking at, similar to some of the federal discretionary grants, how do we get the best return or most benefit for, I don't want to say the least cost, but for, a reasonable investment of state and federal dollars. And so what that means is that we have a lot of local projects, locally administered, or projects with local funds that have been leveraged in our programs. And at the state level, we need the ability, through the funding streams available to us, to apply federal funds if needed to meet obligation limitations or August redistribution needs, et cetera. So it's been longstanding practice in the Commonwealth to use AC to reflect any local contributions on a project. We have started to back off on that a little bit just during my tenure. But again, most of our larger projects in particular are in MPO areas. They may also be seeking, through their MPOs, urbanized STP funds or CMAQ funds. And so they too want to preserve the opportunity to federalize their projects. And so AC has been the mechanism we've used to do that. Does that answer your question, Susan?
Yeah, that's a great response. Thank you very much. Let's see. I want to go back a little bit to Lainey and ask if you can tell us a little bit more about the background. I mean, I think showing the significant difference between the high advanced construction balance that you all had with in 2010 to where you are now. Can you tell us a little bit, we touched on your presentation, but can you tell us a little bit more about why that balance was so high to begin with?
So we believe several factors were involved. Obviously, prior to 2015, we did not have a policy in place which kind of mandated the amount of AC balances that the department was able to carry. We also had limited state resources for our capital program. We didn't have the strength that we have now that we were able to get a new revenue package passed. So having those increased state resources has really helped our capital program, and we're able to rely less on the federal resources and more so on our state resources.
Excellent. Van, one question for you. I wanted to ask a little bit more about your financial management group that reviews AC and cash needs. How did that group come to be? How frequently do they meet? And how do they convey their recommendations to staff like you and others who are working directly in AC and in the federal aid program?
It's been going on a while. My recollection is it occurred during the Great Recession. Obviously those were hard times, and so a group was formed to meet and talk about how to maneuver through that. The participants in that group are the chief financial officer, the chief operating officer, the federal funds unit. We've got a state funds unit, and we got a STIP unit that's involved. That group meets about once a month when, I don't say bad times, but when money's a little tighter, and quarterly, if there's no need to meet, we stretch it out to probably quarterly. So AC is primarily handled on a staff level because the policy, and I don't know, I should call it a practice. The practice is that we AC everything. So the balance just, I won't say goes where it goes, but within a certain range, there's not much questioning of it. We report to this group periodically, and to date, there's been really no efforts to change the amount of AC we have, and we've remained on the policy of AC in pretty much everything other than small projects.
Okay, thank you, Van, very much. So I think we've pretty much, hold on, let me see. I think we might have one other question here. Oh, okay, sorry. I think that's it. I think we've addressed most of the questions. Again, if there's any follow-up questions, folks are free to email me and we'll get a response to you. I'll leave it up to the panelists to see if there's anything else that they wanted to address, or Max, if there's anything else you wanted to cover. If not, I think we'll wrap up here since we've gotten through our questions, and appreciate all of your time and participation. Anybody else have anything else they want to chime in on before we adjourn? Hearing none, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a big thank you to our panelists. Remind you that the webinar slides and recording will be available on the BATIC Institute website by the end of the day tomorrow. And I hope you'll enjoy your afternoon, and do stay in tune with us and stay in touch with us for announcements on our next webinar in October on state legislative update, and then enacted state and public-private partnerships legislation in November. We have 2 of those legislative-focused webinars coming up. So again, thanks everybody for participating, and have a great afternoon.